Ashot Armine, I want to ask you about the project that you will be presenting in Venice. This is the Museum of Modern Art in your hometown, Yerevan. I know that it was built in the 1980s, just a few years before the collapse of the Soviet Union by a very famous Soviet Armenian architect, Jim Tarasyan. If you could maybe talk a little bit about this project. It's in the center of the city. It's on a very urban site. It's a corner site, very prominent site. Tell me what is so special about this project and what are you doing there?
Yeah, so the project itself, the building is very fascinating, especially considering its very rich and turbulent history. It was designed in late 70s as an extension of already existing modern art museum, a museum across the street, which interestingly was the first modern art museum in the whole Soviet Union. And it was opened right during the decline of the Soviet era, as you mentioned. And since the beginning, the project itself was pretty controversial. Some design solutions were very questionable, but at the same time, the project achieved very bold and very almost iconic presence in the city because it was designed as an extension and not as a long-standing museum. It lacked many amenities that you'd expect from usual museums. Architecturally, you can definitely trace influences of brutalist architecture. The building itself consists of five cylindrical monolithic volumes, which the public called the barrels. It's the way everyone calls that museum in Yerevan. All those cylindrical volumes are placed on huge concrete columns, which creates a very interesting, very unique public space underneath. It was meant to have a water surface under there with big concrete platforms, almost arranged almost like a Destil painting, like from Theo van Doesburg or Piet Mondrian. But the water was filled only once for the opening ceremony, and it never been used again due to technical issues.
The reason to display the art in circular spaces was what?
Jim Torreson said that the circular gallery would provide a more democratic gallery space for the artist, where no one is cornered.
This is a very strange, very unusual building. There were many calls, I understand, to demolish it. You already mentioned that many facilities were missing because it was really designed and built as a kind of extension, but nevertheless it stands on its own, has a strange circulation. At the same time, you are kind of position yourself as fighters to preserve modernist buildings, modernist heritage. Why do you think this building deserves a second chance?
As it had a very turbulent history, much like the country itself, it never really fulfilled its real potential. And it was very sad. And during these years, unfortunately, we lost the most part of our modernist heritage. Many buildings were demolished. Many buildings were drastically altered to that point that they're barely recognizable. And we think that our work is always very contextual. It's linked to the context, historical, social, political, and artistic. And in this case, we felt that it is almost our duty to give it a new life, to preserve it, to highlight its importance, and to make it better. It is very interesting how it changed its functions during this past 20 or 30 years, because after the independence, it was almost neglected and never used properly. At some point, it was used as a sausage facility or a gym. The worst part of its alteration was during the early 2000s when they not tried, but they actually closed with glass the whole public space around the cylinders to make room for a supermarket. And now we want to clean it as much as possible, like to bring it back to life, to make it really vibrant art space.
Հաստատի իրան ջահելություն ենք տալիս, որ ինքը չի ունեցել, ոնց որ ծնվել է ու ծերացել է։
Yeah, Arne says that actually we're trying to give the building its youth because it never had one. It was born, and then after the decline of Soviet rule, it was neglected, and now it's perceived as an old building. So we're giving it its youth that it never really had.
And also, Armine said before, you said preserving a modernist building is the most radical statement an architect can make, right?
Yeah, but actually in considering our local context, because we already lost a lot of that heritage and we really love and admire that architecture, we felt that it is almost our political stance to defend that building, to defend that architecture, and even to make it better.
You did many different options, and the options were quite radical, quite bold. If you can talk about that, and how many options did you try, and what did you choose in the end?
Honestly, we already lost the count because we're gathering a huge folders with sketches, and it's very interesting retrospectively to see the whole path of the design process. Initially, our ideas were quite bold, mostly focused on adding elements on top of the building. We explored multiple options. In this context, the barrels are already very bold and they have a really striking appearance. So instead of making a statement ourselves, we decided to highlight what was already there. Our last options, what we want to show during the exhibition, our intervention felt much more appropriate underneath the barrels in the public space. It's probably I can say it's a very sculptural approach, what we achieved in the final option. And it is designed more like a pavilion, not fundamental structural change to the existing building. The goal was to create a space that feels unique, welcoming, and open. But at the same time, we didn't try to hide ourselves. Its curvilinear walls are like weaving around huge concrete pillars, like playing with that space and highlighting the existing structure, exposing that massive concrete blocks in the public space. In our work, context is always more prevailing than any design concept. So we could think of very bold, very interesting design concepts, but they're not contextual. So in this case, context prevailed, and here we are.
Մի բան ասեմ, որ այս դեպքում կոնտեքստը շատ բազմաթիվ օրինակներից հետո ցույց տվեց, որ ավելի նուրբ վերաբերմունք ա ուզում, ով այս հակադրվել է այդ մեծ ցիլինդրներին գծով ու այդ բանանել էմոցիոնալ առումով խոսելով կարելի ասել քամի մտցնել ներս, որը իրան շատ բնական է, մեզ շատ
You know, as always in our duo, Armena's speech is always more poetic. So she's speaking about the wind flow, how the new walls are like wind blown within around the huge concrete columns. And that is also very contextual because we wanted to make a contrast with the monolith brutalist architecture, and our intervention is more like light and flowing.
You said sometimes architects have to step aside from their egos. And then you also said about public space, you said giving public space to the city is the most important gesture.
Many architects all around the world, that is something, I guess, universal. They approach every project like it is their last project, and they want to achieve everything they ever desired in one single project. And that is the presence of the ego of the architect. So in this case, what was very interesting, we tried the same way because, you know, with this project for our practice is very important. It is a very famous in our country cultural institution, and we're working on modernization project. So we thought, okay, this is our chance. We have to do everything we can, everything we ever dreamed of. But then after many iterations, many possibilities discussed internally in our studio, we thought that, yeah, this is the time that we have to calm down to get back and be more gentle. But at the same time, keep the essence of our work, of our ideas.
What is the space under the building that you are proposing is going to look like?
Much of our intervention will not be open to the public, except for the gift shop, like the cafe, etc. Our approach was very artistic in this case. We wanted to make something very sculptural, as it is part of the exhibition. It is very bold right in that gap between the ground floor and the ceiling of the barrels, that layer of public space. And we have many inspirations. I guess that is also very, the sources of inspiration were also crucial for this project. And we really believe that architecture is never about a single idea. It is a result of layering of multiple ideas from multiple different eras and different authors. And we draw our inspiration from art to architecture and beyond. So in this case, we were discussing the works of, for example, Richard Serra's sculptural ribbons, which transform the space. Other art inspirations are probably Christo and Jean-Claude's interventions, because that lightness was very important for us, and it is very interesting how their work transforms how we perceive familiar structures. Because in this case, we had a very familiar iconic structure, but we had to deal with it somehow and to make it more interesting. And from architectural inspirations, probably I can mention Enrique Miralles' work, because he used a lot of that kind of organic curvilinear architectural solutions, almost like a living entity. And you know, at some point, we felt like we're discussing this project with all those people that we admire and we love. But of course, in the end, it's not just about the collecting and layering the influences. At some point, all of these ideas are overlapping, and they become something new, something that reflects your own ideas.
So you are describing your project as a kind of dialogue with all of those influences, with the building itself, right? That's very interesting. And what about the exhibition space? Did you make any changes there?
No, we don't plan any changes in that spaces because as the building was designed as a pavilion, it is a very simple space for exhibitions. So actually going inside, you have a very dramatic transition path when you pass through narrow openings from one barrel to another, and you have clear open walls. But as we already work with this gallery, during some exhibitions, we do design interventions. So we do not plan to make them permanent. They should be very changeable and fluid.
You said good architecture always shows how the architect thinks. How did you try to reflect this idea in this project?
We tried to highlight all our ideas in this project, the need of openness, of lightness, of cheerfulness, and also playfulness. Those are the ideas that we can trace almost in all our projects, regardless of its scale or function.
Մի հատ բան եմ ասել, որ պատի մասին խոսենք, որովհետև ինքը ֆունդամենտալ էլեմենտ է ճարտարապետական, ու ոնց ենք մենք իրան միշտ վերաբերվում, որ սովորաբար ինքը սահման է, երբ որ այստեղ մի մարդուն է, այստեղ ուրիշ մարդուն է, ու ինքը այդ գիծն է, եւ մենք ամբողջ էությամբ դեմ ենք կիսելուն ու բաժանելուն, դրա համար մենք պատը միշտ փորձում ենք ընկալել որպես տարածություններ միացնող էլեմենտ, ոչ թե բաժանող էլեմենտ, այդ բոլոր գործերում է երևում, ստեղ այդ շեշտված է։
In our work, and particularly in this project, we always try to avoid walls as barriers or rigid forms. That is very important for us because we try to highlight that openness where the wall is just a partition from inside and outside, but they're interconnected and they can physically connect to each other. And I'd also add to Armina's words that this approach is almost also very contextual, considering our local tradition of architecture. And this is kind of our opposition to mainly monumental and very heavy grounded architecture of Armenia.
When you speak about your work, you often use such words and phrases as lightness, democracy, you just mentioned openness, freedom, fluidity, emotions, playfulness, color, temporary architecture, political gesture, also political statement, the need for joy, a breath of fresh air, and just for fun. So how else would you describe your work, and what kind of architecture do you try to achieve?
Yeah. In a very short form, you said all that we love, but I'll try to explain it more in an extended form. At first, I'd say that we always try to avoid any stylistic constraints, which is very important for us. There is no fixed formula or a ready-made recipe for our project. But if you look at our projects, you would see like key anchor points or recurring themes in all our projects, which you already mentioned, that lightness, cheerfulness, that is what we really love and admire in the works of our of other architects and artists. Another thing, I don't know how to, for us, you know, even the design process is something that should bring you joy. That is the reason we work, and we always try to experiment. We always try to find new paths in our projects. but it's very risky path to follow because sometimes we fail, but failure is probably part of our growth, and we really embrace it. And that is why we really love temporary architecture, because it's like, it's our playground. It's the place where we are at our most experimental and most fearless, where we can experiment things, to try new things without the constraints of permanence. But those are all the ideas that formed us as architects and just as human beings, because that is what architecture should reflect.
Հետո ժամանակավոր ճարտարապետությունը կարա օրենքներին չենթարկվի ու լինի ուղղակի, որովհետև ինքը կա, ոնց որ Մատիսի նկարները նայում ինքը կա, որովհետև ուղղակի սիրուն է.
Again, poetic analogies. Arne says that. Just a second, ոնց ասցի։
Ասացի, որ ժամանակավոր ճարտարապետությունը կարա այդ իրավունքը իր վրա վերցնի, որ ինքը լինի ոնց որ լինելու համար, առանց նպատակի, որտեղ ինքը սիրուն է կամ լավ է կամ հաճելի է, ոնց որ
temporary architecture often can be meaningless without any ideologies or any particular function, and it just can be for fun and for the joy and for your perception. And she mentioned Henri Matisse, for just drawing for the joy of drawing.
Your work is a antithesis of monumentality, solidity, formality. What kind of lessons would you say you learned in this project?
Being more gentle. It was also very interesting how we tried to make contact with the original architect. It was also a kind of conversation with him, although unfortunately we never met. We were very young when he passed. But we always thought, what if we showed this proposal to him? What would he say?